The nurse should not be the one who puts salt in your wounds.
Meow. Opal's cat, Steve Foco, requested ghost stories for Halloween. So, yeah, sit tight and prepare to be spooked. One of our most primordial fears is of the dark, and of creatures in the dark that are more strong and powerful than us, that hunt us in the dark. I'm kind of used to this because Mr. Bear often hunts me in the dark. So most ghost stories are second person accounts, and I kind of discount them. But I think I'll give you a couple of ones from mine. Now, I don't necessarily believe in heaven, hell, an afterlife, or even ghosts. What I think happens is that time isn't linear, and occasionally it can bend back in on itself. But I have, to start with, a second person one. Many, many years ago in the early 1930s, my grandmother gave birth to a daughter. The daughter was born with only half a rib cage. Now, back then, the doctor was called by the midwife and came in and told them the sad news that the girl was going to die. Though nothing could be done, no hospitalisation, none of that stuff. So my grandfather was downstairs, and what he said to me, and the guy didn't lie much, and he certainly wasn't making this up, kind of haunted me, in a way, for a long time. He heard 3 loud bangs, and he went upstairs and his daughter was dead. Not explainable. My grandmother and the doctor and the midwife had heard nothing at all. He heard the 3 loud bangs and assumed they needed him urgently and ran up the stairs. But he was the only one who heard the 3 loud bangs. Go explain that one. Anyway, I think all families have some sort of mythology like that. I happen to believe that one, but the next 2 are actually first person accounts. The first one, I was working in a 1902 built hospital in a shipyard town in northern England. And I was on my first set of nights on a medical floor. And it was the old Nightingale floors, 28 beds, all in a row, and if you got sick you were moved close to the nursing station. Anyway, so I'm there as a first year RPN student on nights covering breaks, because back then nurses could work hard when they were students. And I saw the ward sister enter the corridor about 50 feet away from me, from a cupboard, and then go into another, cross the floor and go into another cupboard. And then about 10 minutes later she came back out again, and she stopped in the middle and just stared at me for the longest time. And I thought, oh, it's the night sister doing rounds, she's going to come and talk to me. And I was a little nervous because I didn't know much about the patients, right? I was just there basically shouting the alarm if something went wrong. And that was it. So when the 2 trained nurses came back from their sleep break about an hour later, they asked me what had happened, and I told them in my very earnest way I had when I was in my early 20s about what I'd done and what I'd given the patients and what I'd done and all this stuff. So then I said, oh yeah, and the night sister came round, and they kind of looked at me, and they said, what do you mean the night sister came round? They never come round. I said, oh yeah, I saw her, she came in through the back door down there and then came back 20 minutes later, and I thought she was going to talk to me. And they kind of looked at me and they said, oh yeah, right. And I said, no, seriously, I had no idea what they were on about. I said, yeah, so I'm like telling them what happened. And then they asked me to describe her. So I described her. She was wearing like a dark blue uniform, and she had like a tall white hat on, a posh little hat and stuff like that. Anyway, they were freaked out because it turned out that was known as a well-known ghost sighting at that hospital, and it was one of the night sisters who had actually killed herself back in the 1920s. Or so they said. All I know is what I saw, and what I saw is what I saw. The kind of really thing that freaked me about it was they actually took me down to the door and made me show them the door, and I did. And there is in fact a door there, but it was in fact sealed. It had been bricked up. So that was kind of freaky. The other one for me, fast forward about 5 years in my career, and I'm now staff nurse in charge on nights of surgical floor, now in a brand new hospital, literally built in 1986. And this one is kind of interesting. Some deaths in hospital actually affect the staff more than others. The vast majority of deaths don't bother us in the slightest, but this one kind of did. I can't even remember the exact details of it. But the patient died, and it was the oddest thing. Now, my staff were a little hysterical in terms of imagination. The ward clock stopped as soon as the guy died by the nursing station. And by that point we had 6 bedded bays and single rooms because it was a modern hospital. And the clock had stopped, and it's an electronic centrally controlled clock. So I didn't think anything of it. I just said, yeah, the clock stopped, it's just one of those things, don't worry about it. And they were kind of like, oh, the clock stopped, ooh, you know, whatever. And so they kind of freaked themselves out. So I guess I picked up a bit on it. But the strange thing with this was about an hour later, because in England, when somebody died, we drew the drapes around them, made them look tidy, and put a flower on them, and left them in peace for an hour before rushing them off the floor, because death wasn't seen at that time, I don't know if it's still true in England anyway, as an embarrassment or a failure of the healthcare system. It's just seen as part of life. Anyway, the strange part of this was, as we were wheeling the patient off the unit, when he actually crossed the threshold of our unit to the central core, I felt really this blast of cold out of nowhere, and can't explain that. But I looked up and the clock started. Yep, the clocks were centrally controlled. No other clock on any other floors I went and checked was affected. That was the only time in 3 years of working there anything like that ever happened. And they're the only 2 times ever in my nursing career that I can actually verifiably say something weird happened. Now, I think with the nursing sister and is definitely linear time issues, and I think probably for the dead body as well. That's how I've explained it to myself, but honestly I don't know. So you guys have a great day, and thanks for an interesting chat and conversation for videos, Steve. Hope everybody has a happy Halloween. Remember that Halloween is just another day, and the dead shouldn't frighten us, but the living probably should. Doodles! And in SHTF, tomorrow will always be worse than today. Bye!
Little ghost, what I'm scared of most. Can you scare me up a little bit of love? I'm the only one that sees you, and I can't do much to please you, and it's not yet time to meet the Lord above. The first moment that I met her, I did not expect a specter. When I shook her hand, I really shook a glove. She looked into me so sweetly, and we left the room discreetly. No one else could notice it.